Welcome to the Silicon Slopes Conversations. Thank you everyone for taking the time to join us. I'm excited about this one because it's a little bit new, a little bit outside of our purvey. We're here with the NeuroLeadership Institute. We'll let the guests introduce themselves and then we'll get right in.
Thanks for having us, Garrett. My name's Maureen. Hi, everybody. Great to see you today. I'm in from Teton Valley, Idaho, just 4 hours north, and I'm VP of Corporate Solutions at NeuroLeadership Institute, and spend most of my time with my team focusing on supporting organizations, small and large, delivering breakthrough outcomes on both people and culture initiatives. So thanks for having us, Garrett.
You bet.
Justin Calapp. It's great to be here. Originally from San Diego, but I've spent the last 25 years or so here in Utah. Background in management consulting at Accenture, and also some work in business process outsourcing for Xerox. At BYU, I got my bachelor's, master's in psychology degree, and my PhD in psychology, and I've raised 4 kids here in Utah, so call Utah home. Love it.
Very cool. All right. How did we get connected?
Yeah, so again, been here in Salt Lake for a number of years and a fan of Silicon Slopes. I've gone to a couple of different summits that you've had for the last couple of years, and even we went last time and volunteered at Slopes Serves and put together some of the meal kits for fighting the hungry. Over at Pluralsight's one of our clients, and Aaron Sconnard introduced us to Clint, so work with Aaron and Will Clive, the CPO over in Pluralsight. And he recommended that we get together here and come over and share some insights that we have from NLI, and we're happy to be here today.
Cool. All right, so that'll be kind of a recurring theme is you guys have clients that need your services, and we'll mix in some psychology,
right?
Some human behavior.
Sounds
talk
good.
A little bit about the brain, but let's baseline it here with what does NLI do? What do you guys do? What is your business model?
Yeah, thanks for asking. So at NeuroLeadership Institute, or NLI for short, we are obsessed with habit and behavior formation, Garrett. And what that means is we work with organizations, any organization with 2 or more people, to be able to really focus on how do you make your organization more human through science, whether you're a nonprofit, state, local government, publicly traded company, startup, et cetera. And we do that by focusing on essential habits and using brain-friendly neuroscience to help organizations scale that habit formation quickly. And so it's really exciting, but it's definitely the frontier of an area that many folks want to learn more about, but always like us to distill down in simple terms. And so we're excited to share more about those insights today that we focus on with our clients, and also excited to learn more about how some of the insights we have could benefit your community here at Silicon Slopes.
Very cool. So 2 people all the way up to as many as you want, I would imagine.
Right.
2 people sounds like a marriage.
True.
Okay.
And some of the concepts we have today could be used personally, professionally, or in your communities and extracurricular activities. So we'll talk more about that as well.
Gotcha. What else do you want to weigh in there, Justin?
Well, I think we've cracked the code, if you will, on behavior activation. So it's not just enough to know about the behaviors or the habit activation, what habits are most important, but actually unleashing those habits and putting them into a way that's activated, simplistic, going on the simple side of complexity to be able to understand the neuroscience, yes, but how do I apply that in the everyday workplace or at home or in your church or in other community activities? So these principles do apply universally. It's really anything that happens within a social context of 2 or 3 or more people up to 200,000 people, you can scale these sorts of principles.
Very cool. Because some habits are individual, right?
Yeah.
And you can't scale those.
Right.
Usually bad ones. But you can, with organizations, you have systems, whether it's CRMs or policies, procedures, the nuts and bolts. But everyone has like a functioning brain that works at these businesses, right? So you're kind of doing 2 complex things, working with big enterprises or small.
Yeah.
Both have their difficulties, but then you're talking about neuroscience.
right?
So you probably couldn't have done this 50 years ago, or it would have been a little bit nascent, but now there's a lot of scientific proof and kind of validation that shows that it works, right?
Lots of learning that's come as of late to how the brain's functioning, and then how, when we function within that brain capacity, how we interact with one another and the impact that we have on one another in a social setting.
Yeah. So, psychologically, there's fun things and then there's bad things, right? In life and in business, and you guys would know infinitely more about this than I would, but in life, if there's something traumatizing, that'll cause some sort of psychological reaction. But in business, whether it's Silicon Valley Bank, kind of having a rough go of things and ultimately imploding, how is the NLI pertinent to a situation like that?
Yeah, so one of the things we're thinking about, what do we share with the community? Our purpose and our intent here is to share a couple of tools, some knowledge, share a mind map or a mindset that'll help us to get through the uncertainty. In the wake of the SVB failure, how do you, this community, how do tech startups and other organizations continue to thrive? And how do you survive? How do you function in that? So we thought about two principles or two concepts. One is a mental model we call it the SCARF model, SCARF, and we'll talk about that in a minute. I'll show that in a minute. But the other one is then psychological safety. It's a concept that's been out there for a number of years. 1999, Amy Edmondson, Harvard Business School. And we've partnered with her to take her work on and then to add some neuroscience to that, to create a concept around how to create a culture within an organization, small or large, that is psychologically safe for the people that are in that space. So those are two concepts, SCARF model and psychological safety we'll talk about today.
Cool. Should we jump into the SCARF?
Yeah, let's do it.
All
and
right.
Here's a model to kind of help us orient ourselves and look at what SCARF means. So imagine, in the amygdala, mid part of the brain, a really early part of our brain, the amygdala plays a singular function: fight, flight, or freeze, right? It's really that simple. So imagine a large satellite dish, and you're kind of honing in and you're looking for, am I safe? Is this a safe environment? Not only physically, but also emotionally, psychologically. Am I in a safe place? And if we're not, we move into a threat state, the left side of the arrow, right? So a threat state. What happens there, our prefrontal cortex drops out, doesn't function, because it's sending all of the energy and all of its resources towards, I need to get safe. You can't function. We get stupid, right? We get dumb because you can't really function in the prefrontal cortex area. You're most concerned about being safe. That could be, in the case of SVB, it's, am I going to be able to make payroll? Am I going to actually be able to stay in business? Am I going to be able to continue to do and provide services or our product to our customers because I'm feeling like unsafe? The converse is also true. If you're able to be in a safe place and have that concept or that idea safe, then you're in a reward state or a toward state, and you're able then to function, interact with one another. That's when innovation happens. That's when you're able to use all of your brain. And so the elements of SCARF really play kind of a dual role, either to the left or to the right, depending. And the arrow to the left, or the threat state, is much more prominent or prevalent. So we are naturally looking for, is this safe? And it takes more energy. The positive side is good, and we're seeking that out, but we're watching for danger. So in the case of status, do I have status? Am I more than, or am I less than, or am I equal to those that are in the room? And if I feel safe, even if you're my boss, but I feel like I have a voice and I have a way to speak, then I'm in a toward state or a reward state. Same with certainty. Now, certainty is probably the most prevalent or the most applicable to any sort of unexpected event like a CVB event. So the status is, certainty is, do I know what's expected? Do I have a sense of what's coming up and what's on the horizon? The other one is autonomy. Autonomy simply is, can I make choices for my own workplace and what I'm doing, the order that I do work in, the way that I interact with my colleagues, relatedness is that relationship part. It's, do we get along? Do I feel part of this group, or am I an outsider, right? And then fairness, that principle of fair exchange. Is what's happening to us or what's happening to me fair? So you can see this from two different levels, right? Like you said at the very beginning, Garrett, this is a very personal thing for me as a human being. But if you take these principles and this knowledge to a leadership level, and as a leader, you're recognizing, oh, my colleague might be in a threat state right now. He or she may not be able to even function or be in their brain. I'm going to try and help them get to a reward state or get into a toward state and let them, calm down for a minute. So thoughts, reaction, questions to that?
Well, I'm sure there's millions of examples, right?
Yeah.
I'm sure we all have friends that are neurotic that are perpetually thinking they're going to get dumped or divorced or fired.
Right.
So they're burning out all of their fuel in the frontal cortex. Is that
right.
correct?
Prefrontal cortex.
Prefrontal. Yeah. And they're kind of lovable when they're in that state, but not a fun state to be in perpetually. Right.
Well, almost you kind of want to go, it's okay, you're okay, you're safe, it's all right, almost in that sense. How about some examples? What about some?
Well, I was just thinking about my colleague Justin here. So Justin and I are on the same team, and when I think about one example of SCARF and how to use it is, let's say if Justin was high on certainty, and that was his number one SCARF domain or threat state that he easily gets to. As a colleague, whether it's a peer, manager, but in this case a peer example, then I would want to avoid, with someone who's high on certainty, avoid changing plans last minute. Avoid last minute updates, emails, pings, etc. And instead, I would want to communicate frequently and openly with Justin, and also ensure that expectations, no matter how small or big, are very clear. So that's one example of certainty. Autonomy. Many of us, especially just given the pandemic, are higher in autonomy than we've ever been, right? Wanting more choice, wanting more freedom, both professionally, personally, and in our society. So let's say, for example, the second SCARF domain, in this case, if Justin was high on autonomy, then I would want to avoid micromanaging any task or project we're working on together. And this could be true even outside of an office setting. And then instead, offer options. So, Justin, should we take this next step on project A, or would you prefer to take time away and think about it and recommend how we move forward as a team? So these are some examples, and I'll share personally. At NeuroLeadership.com, you can take the free SCARF assessment for you, anyone in your family, community, or even at work, at no additional charge. And what's nice is when I took it, I'm number one high on SCARF domain for fairness. So for me, if something is not equitable, if individual treatment, process, or just behaviors are not equitable and fair, I tend to get uncomfortable or feel like I need to intervene. My second one is relatedness. So I like to get to know people. I like to find a common ground to be able to relate to you so I can open up and be more comfortable. So what's nice is this is a way for me to self-regulate and say, what situations, instances, events, and activities can I be in my best toward state versus where there may be situations, activities, people, groups, communities, etc., where maybe I know I will be in a threat state so I can make better decisions for myself and my brain so I can feel comfortable and productive, and then also help others get the best of themselves applied in any situation. So just a couple examples, Garrett, and happy to share some personal experiences just to show that this is not just about an organization. I use this with my husband at work, and even I backcountry ski a lot. So one of my backcountry guides uses this model when they go out as part of their trip planning to know, Garrett, what is the threat state if we get in one that's going to be most concerning for you, and then we can have a better time out in the backcountry. So this is not just for a corporate setting. I use this in my day-to-day up in Teton Valley all the time and spread the love. So,
yeah. Well, thank you for sharing that. Again, probably millions of examples, right? Do you want me to give you a few and then you can just dovetail on those a little bit?
For sure, yeah, go.
Oftentimes, if you're in a leadership position, whether it's the CEO or the general or the VP, whatever, right? The buck stops with you, or most of the buck stops with you. Folks might think they've got all of the SCARF, right?
Yeah, right.
But
multiple things firing off at once.
Yeah. It's been interesting the last 3 years, by the way. I'm assuming the last 3 years have been wildly insightful for you guys, right? When I know the person, in this case CEO, well enough, like they're a genuine friend, and these are my opinions, right? How is it leading the company? I don't think you're really in charge anymore, because the employees have garnered a lot more power over the last 3 years than the leadership. Again, just my thoughts, my insights. And some of them, if they were honest, have been like, I'm not really in control as much as I used to be anymore, right? So they are not having that autonomy
Right.
that they're kind of used to, and certainty is lacking, which is interesting, right? Because like, if you're day one at a company, you probably scarfs all over the place, right?
So in that case, with the CEO who's feeling like he or she is not as certain, they're not knowing what exactly to expect, one of the ways to kind of manage his or her way out of that is to do additional planning. And that notion of autonomy, like you said, it is a pendulum. Right now we're seeing that pendulum swing of there's a lot of power that's in the hands of the employees. And so the leader really should take an approach of change of influence. Instead of having formal power, as in my title, I become more influential and more fluid in my leadership style to granting and allowing autonomy, allowing choices. The CEO is still granting and operating in those choice environments, but really giving that person the autonomy to be able to make choices on how he or she operates on a day-to-day basis. Seeing that hybrid, coming back to work, in a hybrid setting versus being remote, see that quite a bit. Is that kind of what you were talking about? Yeah.
I can imagine. You guys are gathering all sorts of data on that.
Great insights on hybrid work, by the way. We have several publications that we can show.
Exactly. And one example, too, many of you may know, when it comes to communication, verbally, written, or other forms of communication in your organization, some folks may know the format model, right? In the past, we've been taught to communicate about, why, what if, how, etc. This is another model for communication. So let's say if I had a team meeting or working with peers, I can think, what can I include in my communication, verbal or written, that will include one bit for each of these SCARF domains? Because it's very possible that in many dynamics nowadays, that individuals may not be able to, quote, control the organizational outcomes, but they can have more influence than ever before on their immediate team, individual, and group dynamic. And this is where oftentimes some of the other concerns that are more broad and out of control for an individual may feel less important, because they have this in a close proximity to the people that they spend 80% of their time with. And we know that most people at work have to work through anywhere from 15 to 20 individuals a week to get their job done. And so if those individuals can be practicing these habits whenever possible, oftentimes some of the bigger concerns that may be farther out on the horizon for an organization, a year, 3 years, 5 years, become a little bit more backseat to the experience an employee is having day to day.
So this would work siloed, but it would work much better if everyone was rowing in the same direction.
Well, so ideally leader-led, right? So any and all of these sorts of solutions and ideas are much more palatable in a workplace setting if they're leader-led. That doesn't mean, though, if you have, in the case of you have a toxic leader and they're just not on board, you still, within your own domain, in your own sphere, your circle of influence, you still can operate within this model and recognize and have a little bit of empathy perhaps for that toxic boss or that toxic employer, what he or she's going through and what SCARF domains he or she is knocking off or ticking off. And it provides a common language, Garrett, a common framework that you can now all of a sudden, even as soon as now, tomorrow, the next day, start having conversations with your employees around, what's your level of relatedness? Are you feeling like you're in a threat state? Are you in a toward state or a reward state? So yeah, we find it helpful. This flows through many of our solutions at NLI.
Yeah. And I see, if I can go back like 110 years to like Carnegie Steel, right? Obviously you guys weren't around then, but so Andrew Carnegie kind of had to figure this stuff out on his own. But depending on who you ask or what biographer, I think he did a pretty good job of like the status of the employees is defined, certainty, because this is how much money you guys will earn over the next 3 years, and we'll renegotiate again in 3 years. Autonomy, like when they would strike, it would be, fine, we're not going to bring on anybody new. The weeds will grow up and around this factory before we bring anyone on new. If you guys want to honor your word, we'll start up again whenever you want. Relatedness, right? Like, you guys will also share in the profits. We'll set up pensions. We'll set up a mercantile. And then fairness. It's a 3-year scale, and it's literally like, how much output of steel are you doing? Can't get any more fair than that, right?
Well, and a brilliant application of this model, this principle, in a real case based on the history of that institution and him as a person and in that organization. Brilliant, yeah.
So, with you guys, like, you guys are a business, right? And there's always changes and flows with how to deal with people, right? In this case, there's this SCARF model. How do you guys stay ahead of what's coming next as it relates to, like, psychological health, or how you do it in an enterprise? How do you guys stay on your tippy toes?
Mo, you want to go for that one?
Yeah, so Justin will talk more about this, but we're finding that with SCARF specifically, not only does it include a common language, but it's allowing folks to be more fluent in their dialogue about how they can be their best self. And so there's a new domain that we're emerging and talking about called psychological safety. And that is going to be an area that Justin can dive into, which is really exciting because many individuals oftentimes are not able to articulate, why do I feel uncomfortable? And let's say they don't have the SCARF language, right? How do we help individuals even evaluate, is this situation, activity, individual, and environment good for me right now? And we're calling that psychological safety, and are partnering with Dr. Amy Edmondson, which we'll talk more about, to really join up and partner on the new frontier that many organizations oftentimes have kind of feared diving into, and really kind of taking out the stigma of talking about psychology and brain health. And so, for example, many individuals will leave an organization and they'll, connect with internal folks, and once they leave, they may say, I didn't feel my best self at that organization, but they may not realize what are the criteria they want to evaluate for their next endeavor, whether they're going back to school for continuing education, whether it's maybe doing some nonprofit volunteering or their day job. How can we also help people learn more about psychological safety so they can communicate their wants and needs coming into an organization in terms of expectation setting, but equally as important, being able to have the language to share their wants and needs to determine if they're being met on a regular basis. But Justin, do you want to share more about psychological safety and what we're up to at NLI?
Sure, yeah, and it goes back to that notion of culture. So in any time there is 2 or more people, literally, there will be a culture there. Now, you as a leader have the opportunity to influence that culture, or you can let that culture be what it is and grow organically. And there's reasons to do both. In most instances in the workplace, leaders want to influence that culture. And so this thing here, this notion of psychological safety, is a shared belief. So if we were, this group here, if we were members of a team, it's the shared belief amongst ourselves that there is an ability to raise one's hand and say, Garrett, I think differently, without being punished, without being necessarily fired. Now, it gets tricky there because depending on what that person says, what happens there could be repercussions from that. But the notion is that I feel like I can say that whatever's different or differing from the main idea. And that's really, really important. It actually allows us to not have groupthink. It allows us to share ideas and be innovative. But that's, again, as I was mentioning, all based on the work from Amy Edmondson, Harvard Business School, started this work as early as 1999, probably beforehand. So it's new, but it's not. This notion of it emerges when it's time, it emerges in its time, it is now emerging and is very hot topic and faddish, if you will. One thing I want to be clear about, so when Amy Edmondson and NLI, we came together, we added, from her model, we added the neuroscience to her model to have this notion around 3 habits. And I'm going to talk about the 3 habits in just a minute. But the combination of Amy's work and NLI's work, it really allows us to find out the why and the how, to scale this concept, this cultural identity at a large pace if you need to, and at a large scale, And then for the why, it's important that we as humans know why something is there so we're willing to try a new habit. If we understand the why, it increases our likelihood, it's not a guarantee, increases our likelihood that we're going to try the new habit. And the how actually makes us be, or helps us to be effective when we actually do it. So lots of conventional wisdom out there, lots of misinformation about psychological safety. Conventional wisdom says, means teams are protected from discomfort. We disagree, the research disagrees. It's not an issue of, oh, we want to make sure everybody's comfortable. No, it's really more of an issue of how you function and how productive you are in a level of discomfort. We have stuff that's coming into us like the CVB opportunity where it's unexpected. And so learning the principles of psychological safety and applying the habits, in activating those habits actually lets you productively work in that uncertainty. And so that's why I think we feel like this is a really important topic for now, the tech community here, is how do we deal with, how do we coach one another, how do we continue to be productive and keep our businesses running in the midst of this uncertainty?
So on the previous slide is, I'm going to think about doing a habit.
Here are the 3 habits.
Yeah. So obviously if you're going to take up vodka drinking, that would be, I'm going to probably develop a bad habit right now. But if it's, I'm going to go run a marathon, you'd need to get in a habit of running, right? But it seems like you guys are like one step ahead of that, of like, I'm going to think about developing a habit, right?
Well, we have created, here are the 3 habits. So again, based on Amy Evanson's work and our work at NLI, here are the 3 habits that you could adopt if you wanted to create a culture and environment of psychological safety. The first is set the stage. So in order to establish clarity, again, it's leader-led, right? So to establish clarity, this is a safe environment. You actually name it, you say it, but then you have to live it, of course. But then the second is invite participation. That's so that you increase the level of engagement. And in this work that we do with organizations, we really talk about empathy and humility, which I personally love because those are characteristics of every human being. And for so long in organizations, you haven't talked about those soft skills. Those are emotions, right? But we're really talking about the leader leads with a sense of humility. So you invite participation. This isn't formal power where thou shalt do this or that. This is an invitation to act and behave differently. Third behavior or third habit is respond thoughtfully. So this has a whole notion of mindfulness, being a thoughtful and being a present leader, being a present team member, so that you can move the thinking forward. Notice here on these 2 sub-bullets, on the moments that you do have to challenge, because someone's going to raise their hand and say, hey, I think blue is the color, and you're going to say, Justin, appreciate that you think that blue's the color. We're going the direction of red. Whatever it is, right? So people can challenge and they have their voice to raise their hand. That doesn't just mean that we have to accept anything and everything that everyone says. So there's an evaluation level there as too. But doing so humbly, doing so kindly, and then affirming and validating warmly. Those are kind of the 3 habits in short. Want to talk about application? This is what psychological safety solves for.
Yeah, so the brain typically is a very complex organ. However, it does process information very simply. So meaning, even though we think about the brain as a complex part of our body that maybe most of us, because I'm not a psychologist like Justin, in terms of having a PhD in psychology, but what's exciting about NeuroLeadership Institute is we simplify these complex concepts so that way the brain typically can only remember 3 things at once. And so when we think about learning one habit at a time in a sequential way, NeuroLeadership Institute would typically not move from the 3-habit framework that Justin just shared. So thank you. And what we're finding is psychological safety is definitely a newer concept that's becoming easier to talk about for some organizations. But the clients that we're partnering with now globally, again, large and small organizations, are seeing some really fantastic results both at the individual, team, group, and organization level. So for example, I talked to a client the other day that said, hey Maureen, It's so exciting to see that as we practice these 3 habits, right, that Justin just shared, we're finding that individuals are becoming less burnt out at work over time. So that's one of the benefits we've seen. And obviously, burnout is an individual definition, but they're seeing that because of that lack of burnout in teams that have higher psychological safety, they're also able to be more efficient in their jobs, and they're delivering better quality results as an individual. And you could imagine that that does parlay into group outcomes. So again, another client conversation recently had shared that group dynamics, we're avoiding groupthink. That's one of the benefits on a team level that Justin shared, but we're also getting to fewer errors. So fewer mistakes, fewer errors, because individuals feel comfortable having that courageous conflict or psychological safety in a healthy way. And we know that that saves, fewer mistakes and improved quality equals generally better returns for shareholders, bottom line health of an organization, and folks can have a lot more fun at work as well. And then organizationally, we're seeing for clients that are really focused on psychological safety at their core, they're seeing benefits such as increased retention of their employees. So their churn rate and burn rate of talent is definitely more than 10% improved over their industry benchmarks. And in addition, they're seeing that they are better positioned for change. So whether that change is planned change or whether it's unexpected change, that the organization and their people are able to manage through it without as many negative downside repercussions. So just some really exciting outcomes. And I don't know any organization globally or locally that isn't looking to deliver those improvements with and for their people, shareholder, customers, and bottom line financials.
Do you see the applicability of this or in your day-to-day, not only here within Silicon Slopes, but also with the community members and your sponsors and others that are here with Silicon Slopes? Do you see this being applicable and relevant?
Oh yeah, for sure. We hear a lot about the words on this slide, anecdotally on phone calls or just conversations, but it oftentimes comes up in the podcasts and in the content. And I have a feeble brain. I'm not able to stay with the current and then project in the future, but I can go into the past pretty easily. And I'm just kind of here imagining, let's just pour Blockbuster. Let's say it's Blockbuster.
Okay.
In 2002, 2003. Surely they missed the boat, right? They had a few chances to not miss the boat. And perhaps there's books or, white case studies about it, which would probably be beneficial for you guys. But if this happened at Blockbuster, probably would have been a different result. My guess is it was opposite of this. I'm just guessing.
Well, so again, leading to the outcomes, so this next slide here, if I had to just give 3 outcomes, and there are several, it would be effectiveness, innovation, and agility, off to the far right, right? So your point about Blockbuster, innovation would have been the case, right? And these are aligned to each of the 3 habits. So had they implemented, set the stage, they would be able to establish clarity, collaborate deeply, and that would result in increased effectiveness. And so in the case of Blockbuster, innovation is an outcome, is something to expect from properly implementing psychological safety. Having a culture here where people are ready to speak up. Imagine in an innovation session, if people weren't able to disagree, people weren't able to bring up alternative ideas, it seems like you would be stagnated. And so I think that's, you were gonna say?
Oh yeah, and it works in the reverse. So Garrett, Blockbuster, RIP Blockbuster. I'm a kid of the 80s, so enjoyed Blockbuster a lot. We've seen even with Boeing, for example, so it works in reverse as well. So let's say, for example, when Boeing had their 737 MAX jet challenges, they called NeuroLeadership Institute first and said, we'd like to bring you in here to help build habits of our 144,000 employee global company on how people can feel more comfortable speaking up on safety issues. Boeing is the paramount of safety and quality in their industry and sets the lead for many other industries outside of aerospace. And they really had taken a cultural hit of the lack of pride employees felt when they had those challenges with their new jets. And so as a result, they hired NeuroLeadership Institute to come in to help people have more of a growth mindset of the art of the possible, that the organization could recover from that moment in time that was a low point. And so now they've realized that speaking up on safety and quality issues from the bottom up in the organization is critical to avoid what was that really challenging moment in their organizational history. And then Microsoft's another client that we work with as well. They have over 200,000 employees globally. And innovation is key to them, and they know that, and they plan for that in their programs. And so we had the wonderful opportunity, and continue to do so with Microsoft, to help instill growth mindset versus fixed mindset, which is a strong foundation for psychological safety, to ensure that employees at Microsoft can continue to think about the art of the possible, so that way they can innovate in their day job, which then can result to more innovation at scale for hopefully break glass moments for them in their market and their stock price. So really exciting. And these are just a couple of the bigger brands we work with, but we work with many other small, independently owned organizations and mid-sized companies as well that are sharing similar stories, just at a different scale.
Sure. I've got one or two more questions, then we're going to open it up to the audience. So maybe the audience questions, they can be actual, here's how I'd like to do it, or does this work for our company? But you've mentioned you can work with companies that are small and big. Let's just, for funsies, say it's a 100-person company and they've raised a Series B and they're just turning profitable, and the leadership team reaches out to y'all. What does that look like from the first call to like onboarding to when you guys can say this was a success?
Yeah, I'll take this, Mo, and then back me up or correct me, whatever's off. So from that first call, it really is what's going on in the organization. What are you seeing? What's showing up in your business day to day? And then take that information or those pieces and to begin to build a solution. Psychological safety is not the only solution at NLI. We have a host of others. So it may be a case where we've prescribed a particular learning journey or a particular path to solve the specific needs of the organization. The scalable part is you can go all the way from hiring a consultant and doing teaching rollouts of multiple solutions across a year or 2 or 3 year long plan, a roadmap, if you will. Or it could be as easy as we have asynchronous tools that are look at this concept, practice this tool, implement this on your own, kind of a DIY sort of model. And those, of course, are scaled economically to the size of the organization and to the level of intervention. Maybe you are an organization that has really worked on growth mindset for a number of years with Carol Dweck's work on mindset, and you're just looking for a little bit of intervention. Well, we can come in and add that intervention on that topic, either with an executive summary or an executive presentation, to a full-blown teach of the course content, to a here, look at some of these videos, watch some of these practices, and then implement it on your own. A little bit of a certification, if you will, on have teachers within your organization teach this concept and go there. What did I miss? What else do we need to add?
Well, that's great, Justin. I appreciate that because, for example, Garrett, in that Series B example you gave, we see many startups specifically, regardless of where they are in their financial journey and investment raising, where specifically they have very strong cultural principles oftentimes, right? That's why maybe those owner founders have gotten together. That's maybe why they've brought other individuals they've known from former ventures. Is oftentimes, it may be unsaid, but it could be implicit, that the cultural and values of why those individuals are coming together to even begin and launch that startup from the beginning, there's oftentimes a common ground there. Hence, they probably would have stuck with whatever venture they were in prior, or spent time fishing or doing other recreating activities. And so what we find is that many organizations will define their culture and principles, but that even at a small startup, not everybody understands how do I actually practice those cultures and principles and values that my startup has rooted in and that is really going to guide the philosophy of the organization, products, services, experience for customers, et cetera. And so what we do is we help organizations, especially at that seed stage, really define what are the habits and behaviors that align to those values so that employees know what to do or not do to live the values and cultures and culture principles. And so we do that through identifying habits, really the how for the what or the why. And so that's where organizations sometimes will partner with us, maybe even just for 1 to 2 years to get that baseline framing, and then they feel like they can take it from there. So it's really exciting to see that many organizations know where they want to go, they know what they want to achieve, but how they get there and the shared everyday habits, is kind of what we refer to it as, Garrett, is oftentimes where tech startups end up getting most value from us versus, let's say, your traditional Big Four consultants that may be operating at a different level of scale for their appetite.
The other thing that I've noticed too with working with entrepreneurs is that there's always a commonality with entrepreneurs. There's always a passion for whatever it is they do, their service or their product or their concept, their idea. What we like to do, and others as well, is add operational rigor to that passion. So the passion combined with operational rigor to be able to implement something and execute with excellence, I think that's the added value that happens at the level of an entrepreneurial startup.
Yeah. And it sounds like it's very flexible in that you guys can handhold.
Yes.
Oh, we're very good at that. My team and I spend a lot of time, especially because today's complex and very busy environment. People do need the nudge, they need the handhold. Because, for example, one client called us recently. Their solution is actually a SaaS product. It's a software, and initially they wanted to even have us consult. This is a different example, departure from what we're discussing, but they wanted to say, hey, NeuroLeadership Institute, we'd love to understand how are we making our software brain friendly so that when we actually reach the target market, that we know that the system, the software, the app, the application, whatever the SaaS product they may be delivering is actually intuitive and has a higher uptake because the system and the way the product is interacting with the end user, whether it's B2B or B2C, is more brain friendly. So therefore, their product may actually use that as a differentiation, helping get more outside capital and or ensuring a higher likelihood of success in that venture. So sometimes we'll actually not always come at it from the people and behavior perspective, even though for most organizations these days, especially tech startups, their people is their biggest asset oftentimes as they grow. And so in addition to just supporting people, we also can help to consult and advise on product form factor and actually help improve systems so that way they actually get to their end result that they need. And that's an inverse use case that we're seeing more and more organizations come to us for because they're looking for how can they create more distance between their value proposition and maybe the tech startup that may be competing with them for market share and or capital.
Yeah, a lot to unfold. We were talking a little bit before and we came to the conclusion you guys could talk about this for hundreds of hours, right?
Or at least for a while, at least a hot minute.
Yeah, you can kind of tell when folks have latched on to a teaching methodology or a tool, right? Whether it's from the Boy Scouts or military or something. But a good example that I like is duck hunting, right? If you get invited to go duck hunting and it's at the person's club or their spot, they're in control, right? And sometimes this is for fun, sometimes it's for networking, but you can see that they've got some framework that they operate their life from, because I might know them in a business setting and I'll be damned if it doesn't look the same in the duck blind, right? Of like, hey, these snacks are for everyone. Does anyone disagree with how we've set up the decoys? Does anyone have any questions on like how we call out the shots? Who's got the best eyesight? Do you guys want to use your duck calls, right? Like, even though they're in control, they open it up for everyone else. And 3 minutes later, everyone's just happy, hunky-dory, having a great time, and the day goes infinitely better, right? And I'm sitting there thinking, like, they just did something some Jedi mind trick on everyone, right?
Well, I love how your brain works, by the way. I love the application that you've had of this model. So we've shown you this model 3 or 4 minutes ago, whatever the time is, and you've already made a couple of really great applications. That's the sign of a great model, because it gives the concepts and the ideas a place to apply towards. And so I love that example.
And we also find, too, at NeuroLeadership Institute, we focus on 3s, as you can tell. Priorities, habits, and systems are oftentimes the 3 common themes in any organization or any activity, right? So in duck hunting, typically that individual, right, I'm not a duck hunter, but do love the outdoors. Typically what would happen is that individual that is invited you out, Garrett, that day will typically have a prioritization that they're using to prioritize which activities, right, are going to be the most critical that day to keep you safe, and also make sure to prepare for any, let's say, weather patterns or other unexpected things. So priorities are critical, and the habits that individual instill to be successful are oftentimes common as well. And then the systems they use. So the systems may be the questions they ask, right? Or an organization, the system may actually be a piece of software. But priorities, habits, and systems, we find that successful organizations and people will tend to focus on similar consistent frameworks like that, whether they're out duck hunting on the weekend or, let's say, in the boardroom or running a frontline team. And so it's just exciting to see that these common themes have such a ripple effect in the experience people have, whether it's duck hunting or sitting here today. And so many folks will call us to say, hey, we need to focus on our PHS, priority, habits, and systems, and making sure that they're aligned to our culture and values. And then that is also another way, as you can tell, we're pretty agile in terms of how we partner with organizations. And that's one of the exciting parts about being at NeuroLeadership Institute is we have that flexibility of choice to determine which clients may need certain services and how can we think big to find a way to support them over time.
Oh. There we go. We broke the dam right here and then back there.
Okay, so one of the big things in tech right now, there's, they've always been known for their awesome benefits, Google, Facebook, Twitter, others. It's like living in a country club, and if you've seen some of the videos lately, then people kind of bragging about where they work, and then the next thing, they're laid off. And you've got the CEOs coming out and saying, we're going to run our companies differently. Elon Musk bought Twitter famously and laid off 2/3 of the company. So how would you address, this sounds like an employee safety maybe model, how would you help employees deal with the fact that, hey, 1, they might lose their job even though they've been there 10 years, and 2, hey, my benefits are getting cut, all these cool perks are gone now, I don't feel safe or whatever. How would you address that?
So I'm going to switch back to this model, for the SCARF model, for a little bit. Raising the level of certainty. So raising the level of certainty within the organization through communication around, here's what's going on in our organization today. Transparency is a big one. There has been a pendulum swing, as we were talking about earlier, with regard to power, where power sits, whether it's with senior leadership formally or otherwise, swinging over to the employees and then somewhat back into the middle. So I sense that we sense that there's this movement back towards the middle in terms of power shift dynamic. And so helping to elevate and raise certainty, still offering a sense of autonomy with regard to losing their job possibility, but here are other options. We had talked about with a client recently, perhaps going to 4 days a week, or are doing some other sort of alternative work style approach to be able to be flexible, help to reduce the operating expenses of the organization while not necessarily laying off people. In the cases of laying off, the thing that you really should do and work hard on is ensuring that those that remain, having to do more with less, are feeling like they have a voice. They have a place to talk about. So often offering channels and places for them to communicate their fears and their frustrations, what's going on with them that are staying, so that they continue to feel safe and they continue to be productive. Did that answer your question?
I really appreciate this model. It rings true to me, but I'm just curious, take it a little more macro. How do you see these principles in this model applying to helping us solve some of the big challenges we have in society, where there's so much incivility and people are scared to speak up, in an organization that's sort of contained, but how do we amplify that to broader society? I'm just curious if you have any thoughts on that.
You want to give it a go?
I have one idea. Justin may want to add, but thanks for your question. We are actually seeing at NeuroLeadership Institute an increased velocity for educational organizations wanting to partner us to imprint some of these priorities, habits, and systems for the brain into younger generations who will be the future leaders of communities, individuals, organizations, nonprofits in our future society. And so it's really exciting to see organizations realizing that this type of academic programming is actually a gap in many of their legacy programming curriculum. And so growth mindset, or what we call GROW at NeuroLeadership Institute, has been our #1 program requested to be rolled out by educational organizations, specifically teaching students how to have more of a growth mindset versus a fixed mindset. So if you asked me, do I speak French, I may say, if I had a fixed mindset, no, I don't speak French. But if I have a growth mindset, I would answer your question saying, well, I don't speak French yet. Meaning there's still the art of the possible in the future of my lifetime that I may learn new skills, and that's showing that I'm open to the consideration that maybe I will be able to speak French in the future. Very simple example. But oftentimes, especially in the Western world, we can have a very fixed mindset. As a society, even in Western North America here, we are much younger in our society than, let's say, Europe and other parts of the world. And we could probably take some pages out of history books, but we also can look at the brain to say, how can we as a society ensure that we're taking care of others? So when people say, another example, take care of thy neighbor, right, literal or figuratively, what does that actually mean in 2023 and beyond? In the past, that may have looked different. Let's say if my parents, grandparents, or great-grandparents' generation. Today, it may look like me checking in on literally my neighbor to ensure, are they safe psychologically? Are they safe mentally? How can I support them to be an improved individual for themselves? That may be the best thing that I can do versus bringing a casserole over and or asking if I can take care of their dogs or watch their kids for the evening. And what most people don't realize is oftentimes when we go to reach out in a helping hand, let's say during the pandemic or now, we may be really focusing on level 1 needs versus higher needs that people need to actually enjoy that downtime that they have, or maybe get out of a tough financial situation or whatever may be plaguing them. So those are a couple just societal examples that we're seeing. And we definitely are also partnering with many 3-letter acronym U.S. government agencies as well that realize that their leaders in those government agencies can benefit from many more of these concepts that oftentimes, I'm a big believer anyone can change at any time, and so can any system. And so it's exciting to see just some of the bookends of both state, local, and also U.S. federal government leveraging NeuroLeadership Institute as well as academic institutions. And that's the market trend we're seeing, and there's definitely an appetite there. But those are some of the examples that I have. Anything you wanted to add, Justin?
No, nothing to add. Thank you.
Okay, great question. Thank you.
Okay, so we got one online. This is Jamie Hinckley saying, have you introduced any somatic tools to teams that are struggling?
Just somatic or
Somatic, yeah, like movements, stuff.
okay. Kinesthetic, perhaps kinesthetic movements. Is that? I'm just trying to understand the question.
Yeah,
Say it again.
Somatic, SOMATIC. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, go ahead.
That's a great example. So I take part in a lot of somatic dance locally in Teton Valley. That's one of the offerings of some of the mental health organizations that we have locally that do some programming. But the answer is not yet. So I won't say no. I'll have a growth mindset and say not yet. That's a wonderful example. And this is where, when we think about somatic health practices, although I'm a certified professional coach, I'm not a therapist, but as a receiver of somatic health benefits and other mental health and physical health somatic healing that I've done, even locally here in the High Mountain West, is it can be very, very beneficial for individuals through motion, right, to be able to clear their mind and their nervous system, which the brain does regulate heavily, to be able to be open to more possibilities. And so what's exciting is that we are seeing more interest, but it's not formal yet, in terms of what I would call health and wellness. And so we do have a lot of health and wellness practitioners. They may be somatic healers, they may be other type of non-traditional healers that are trying to look at how can we plug in with some of the concepts that NeuroLeadership Institute has, whether it's at a wellness retreat, whether it's for a yoga studio, or even other more traditional health and wellness. And so there's definitely, as you can see, a frontier that we've not yet tapped into. And so that's just sharing a little bit more about my personal experience with somatic practices. And these are some great ideas coming from the audience that we can bring back to our team. So, anything you wanted to add, Justin, on that?
No. Looks like another question here.
So how do you, as an employee of a broken system, being a little vulnerable here where I work, where a lot of these SCARF, like status, certainty, autonomy, all of that is a little very uncertain. And so how do you go to your employer, especially when they don't have an HR person? It's a small business. They've been in business 6 years, so it's like 15 people. So
Yeah.
how do you go to them and say, I don't feel that I feel like my autonomy is being threatened. I feel like there's not relativeness. Like, I know that, okay, yeah, walk away, leave the job, but my personality is not to give up quickly. And so what do you say? Hey, read this book or learn about SCARF model. Like, what is your recommendation when you're feeling like you are on that other end of one of those are being threatened? How would you handle that? What would be the words that would come out of your mouth?
Yeah, thank you for the question, and thank you for the vulnerability, truly. This is an inside-out model. So this change happens internally within yourself first. So internalizing this acronym, or internalizing the concepts and the principle of this particular model first, and then begin practicing that. How does that practice look? So we actually have terms, and we use it. Oh, I was just scarfed. I was in a meeting and I was just scarfed. So we use a verb, to say we were just scarfed. So first understanding, like when you're in a moment, like say you're in a meeting and you're feeling scarfed, or you're feeling like you got into this threat state, you've been kicked into this I need to get out of here state. Recognize that. Use some mindfulness tools and techniques to say, okay, this is what this is. I'm going to take a break. I'm going to take a walk, and I'm going to calm myself and get myself back into a toward state. And then invite a dialogue. It is a dialogue, but it's a for me-ness dialogue. Let me try and explain that, unpack that. So say you have an opportunity. You said you didn't have an HR representative. So whomever is the senior leader or your file leader, your leader, would it be okay if we have a dialogue? Could I have a dialogue with you? And I honestly and truly would, and I've done this in consulting with lots of organizations, lay out a model like this and say, this is a model that I'm working from that I wanted to share with you. And for me, when this happens, I feel this way. You identify it. You're actually teaching them. You're inviting them into a different relationship. Right? They may not accept, right? And they may be like their old ways, and they're, you either do this or the highway, right? But you're making an effort to implement this on your own, and you're the agent of your change. So first restate, first internalize, and then can I have a conversation with you? Here are the principles that I've looked at and I'm learning, and when this happens, this is how I feel. And then what should we do about that? Can you help me understand that? Right? So it's an invitation into a dialogue to do things differently. The outcome of that meeting will be very clear for you. Either they'll go, oh my gosh, you're experiencing this. Thank you for sharing this. I did not know. Or, hey, that's kind of the way it is here. Right? Now, I'm oversimplifying it for the sake of your case, but you're inviting them into a dialogue. Okay, I'll stop there. What else would you say, if anything? Or Garrett?
Yeah, it's definitely not as easy, as oftentimes we want it to be. But Justin's example is great. And if you were to think, let's say in that scenario, if the individual you were meeting with who had status or power or authority in that organization was not meeting you where you were at that moment, that likely will inform, right, that maybe it is time to move on to the next thing in the right time. You may not say that in that moment, but you may think that. So I'll just take the example or scenario further. Let's say you are looking at an opportunity that you've developed or that has come to you unexpectedly. This is a framework for you to be able to use that reflection that Justin shared and evaluate not just, do I like the mission, vision, values, and is this organization aligned to my true value set? A lot of us can make those decisions. That may have been what led you to the organization you're at today. However, we may not have thought and said, what is the style of working? What is the principle of leadership culture? How do they assimilate or not together? And using this framework to even evaluate your next job opportunity, not just the job, the role, the function, the leadership team, the organization, and maybe even if they're publicly traded, looking at analyst calls to say, and third-party information to say, if I'm high on certainty, is this the right organization for me to join? Because maybe I'm looking at their website and I can't tell what it is that they do. If I can't tell that from their website, chances are I may not have certainty internally, but you can ask those questions of recruiters. So this is a framework that I would encourage everyone, whether it's looking at what advanced degree, education, internship, again, I use this for volunteering opportunities, to be able to clearly evaluate what's in it for you if and when you do take that next stage. So I'll give you one example personally just to share, because sometimes personal examples, I'll be vulnerable as well. I recently decided to look to get back into volunteering in local board service in Victor, Idaho, where I live in Teton Valley. And there's more nonprofits in Teton Valley per capita than any other city in the entire US. And so as a result, there were lots of options for me to give back. I travel for work, so board service is an easy way for me to do that with my unique schedule. And so as I was looking at different nonprofits, I used this framework, the SCARF model, because I know I'm high on fairness and relatedness, to see if those two things would be true, not only within the board composition of those individuals, but the executive director, the 15 staff that work at this small but mighty nonprofit. And I use this as a way to determine, is this going to be a fit, right, in the marriage of this nonprofit relationship. And it was really interesting because I found that oftentimes it was the unusual suspects that I was looking at in terms of opportunities that fit my needs more than what I thought initially at first glance. And so now I've made that decision and they are more clear about my wants and needs in a way that allowed me to empower them and me together versus just showing up and telling them what I needed or making demands or requests. And so this is about kind of 1 + 1 = 3, right? How can you get a force multiplier that can make you happier and safer psychologically while also advancing those relationships you have formally and informally?
On the SCARF model, from a leadership perspective, when you're trying to implement this, do you ever find that there is conflict between your efforts in a certain area with another area of the same model? For example, certainty seems like it could be at conflict with autonomy. Like some employees might be thinking like, I need more guidance. And another employee is saying, I need more autonomy. And so if I'm working with a whole team, those might be in conflict. Or status seems like it might be in conflict with relatedness or even fairness. If you're trying to implement some of that in an organization, do you ever find that there are pitfalls there or difficulties, and how do you resolve them or address them? So,
fantastic question. Thank you for asking. The thing that I think we have felt and seen is that organizationally, this model will take on a certain characteristic or a certain culture, and then when you go down within the organization and be on a certain team, certain characteristics or qualities in that culture, that team culture, perhaps will be different. But at the very base root of this is individual. So we're experiencing these different domains in our own personal lives and in our own self, and we're seeing it in others. So as a team leader, if there's a certain trend, we can talk about that trend, such as certainty. But in my one-on-ones, I would talk individually and begin to understand that person's tendencies or where they feel safe and address it at a one-to-one level, at a team leader level. Organizationally, it becomes more thematic, but that organizational level is dealing still with individual leaders. So if it's a CEO dealing with, the SVP of sales, that's still a one-to-one relationship, even though the principles cascade throughout the organization. The CEO is still talking to the SVP and having a conversation and a dialogue around, they're perhaps high in this category, this domain, or low in that other one. Other thoughts or other things that contribute?
Yeah, just to wrap up, as I think we're almost up on time, is let's say, for example, if you were running an emergency room, right, or a surgery center, and you and your team were leading brain surgery on a daily basis, certainty is non-negotiable, right, in that situation. So depending on product, service, job to be done for the organization you lead or work for or own, there may be ways to say, okay, well, although we cannot trade off certainty during brain surgery for the employees doing that surgery on the patient, if someone is high on autonomy but low on certainty, high on certainty in that case, there could be other times that the organization or manager or boss or team member outside of that surgery application, let's say in the administrative part of their job, or other benefits for their job, where you can, if somebody feels like they need more autonomy, that you could consider for the parts of the job that don't have to be 100% certain, where can that individual supervisor, manager, or team create more autonomy in other aspects of the role, so therefore they feel more balanced. So it's not always going to be 100% foolproof, because certain jobs to be done do require certain elements of this to be 110% every time, but most jobs have different elements that, even if it's some of the, let's say, even paid time off, right, or other administrative parts of the role that autonomy could be developed into, could make the difference of that employee doing better work, making few mistakes, and staying longer and more engaged than if we only focused on what I would consider the high leverage part of a job, that sometimes these domains may be non-negotiable depending on the job to be done. So hopefully that helps, just to give a complementary perspective.
Well, I think we could go for hours and hours, but time's up. You guys are able to stick around for a minute. Great questions from the
thank
audience.
you.
Great questions from online. Thank you, Mo. Thank you, Justin, for taking the time to join us. Appreciate it.
Thank you for having us
Thank you,
here.
everyone.
Have a good
Appreciate
rest of
it.
your day.